There's some confusion here. I think there's a real asymmetry between science and religion that shouldn't go unobserved. And there's an effort on the part of David and Bradley to not own the very clear propositional claims that have been made by every religion for millennia. Claims about the way the universe is structured. Very explicit claims about what's going to happen in the future, about what happened in the past, about what happens after death. And these claims are incompatible. So, for instance, if Buddhism is true, Buddhism purports to be true. Buddhism has a doctrine of karma and rebirth. You can be reborn as an animal. You can be reborn in various realms. If Buddhism is true, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are absolutely false in their core claims. I mean, these are not pictures that can be squared logically. And every religion is in the business of making these claims about the afterlife and about all manner of other things. And the crucial difference between religion and science is that every religion is beholden to its literature and doesn't think, for the most part, apart from the fringe of kind of liberal intelligentsia, for the most part, people don't think it's man-made. They don't think that these are just books. If everyone read the Bible like Shakespeare, Hitch and I would be doing something entirely unrecognizable right now. I mean, there would be no problem. And so the problem we're articulating is everyone has this idea that they have knowledge about the afterlife, the end of days, the virgin birth of certain people, etc. And these are claims to truth, and they are profoundly anti-scientific because you can't edit the books. You can't edit the Quran. You can't edit the Bible. You can't acknowledge freely within the context of the faith that there are just mountains of life-destroying nonsense in these books, and that's a problem. Don't you know that there's going to come a day when you'll be sick or someone close to you will die, and you'll look back on the kinds of things that captured your attention, and you'll think, what was I doing? You know this, and yet if you're like most people, you will spend most of your time in life tacitly presuming you'll live forever. I mean, it's like watching a bad movie for the 4th time. Yeah. Or bickering with your spouse. These things only make sense in light of eternity. I mean, there better be a heaven if we're going to waste our time like that. So unlike religious people, we atheists really have a good reason to make the most of life, to make the most of the present moment. Because even if you live to be 100, there are just not that many days in life. There's a false assumption about science operating here. Science is not in principle committed to the idea that there's no afterlife, or that the mind is identical to the brain, right, or that materialism is true. Science is completely open to whatever in fact is true. And if it's true that the consciousness is being run like software on the brain and can, by virtue of ectoplasm or something else we don't understand, can be dissociated from the brain at death, that would be part of our growing scientific understanding of the world if we could discover it. Now, and there are ways we could in fact discover that if it were true. The problem is there are very good reasons to think it's not true. And we know this from now 150 years of neurology, where you damage areas of the brain and faculties are lost. And they're clearly, it's not that everyone with brain damage has their soul perfectly intact, they just can't get the words out. Everything about your mind can be damaged by damaging the brain. You can cease to recognize faces, you can cease to know the names of animals, but you still know the names of tools. I mean, the fragmentation in the way in which our mind is parcellated at the level of the brain is not at all intuitive, and there's a lot known about it. And what we're being asked to consider is that you damage one part of the brain, and the mind, something about the mind and subjectivity is lost. You damage another, and yet more is lost. And yet if you damage the whole thing at death, we can rise off the brain with all our faculties intact, recognizing grandma and speaking English. Now,
David?
And I think a much more important point is if everything you're saying about your religious orientation is true, because you're basically confessing a kind of scientific attitude toward the mysteries of subjectivity and what happens after death, then the usefulness of holding to these traditions and these first century books is I'm completely at a loss. I mean, it seems like you're in the wrong line of work. You should be psychology. It's true that some people define God as pure consciousness or as being synonymous with the laws of nature. But if we talk about consciousness and the laws of nature, we won't be talking about the God that most of our neighbors believe in, which is a personal God who hears our prayers and occasionally answers them. So I just want you to be sensitive to this, because if Michael or I say something derogatory about Islam or Christianity, which seems possible, the response from the other side shouldn't mention quantum mechanics. And it shouldn't reference a notion of God that is so denuded of doctrine as to more or less be synonymous with pure mystery or pure information or pure energy or pure anything. So I wanted to plant a flag there where you all can see it, because the God that our neighbors believe in is essentially an invisible person. It's a creator deity who created the universe to have a relationship with one species of primate. Lucky us. and he's got galaxy upon galaxy to attend to, but he's especially concerned with what we do, and he's especially concerned with what we do while naked. And he almost certainly disapproves of homosexuality, and he's created this cosmos as a vast laboratory in which to test our powers of credulity. And the test is this: can you believe in this God on bad evidence, which is to say on faith? And if you can, you will win an eternity of happiness after you die. And it's precisely this sort of God and this sort of scheme that you must believe in if you're going to have any kind of future in politics in this country. No matter what your gifts. I mean, you could be an unprecedented genius. You could look like George Clooney. You could have $1 billion, and you could have the social skills of Oprah, and you are going nowhere in politics in this country unless you believe in that sort of God. I'd like to take a moment, as many people have, to just acknowledge the void that is left by the death of our friend Hitch. While it might be possible to guess what he would have thought about a number of the topics raised here, it's almost impossible to imagine how well he would have expressed those thoughts. The man had more wit and style and substance than a few civilizations I could name. Many people claim to find it impossible to believe or to imagine that they won't exist after death. Just try it for a second. I mean, you imagine that everyone in Paris right now is getting along fine without all of us. I mean, none of us are in Paris. We are really, really materially absent from whatever is going on in every other city on this planet right now. You were absent for all of human history before your birth. The idea that you simply can't imagine not existing after death is really kind of just for lack of trying, I think. The deeper point here, and this is where the whole style and content of what you're saying is so deeply unscientific, is that there's not a physicist sitting on this stage right now. Okay, I would never be tempted to lecture a room full of 1,000 people at Caltech about physics. I'm not a physicist. You're not a physicist. And And basically every sentence demonstrates that you speak on the subject. Now, to not believe in God is to know that it falls to us to make the world a better place. We have barely emerged from centuries of barbarism. It's not a surprise that there are shocking inequities in this world. It is hard work to climb down out of the trees, walk upright, and build a viable global civilization when you start with technology that's made of rocks and sticks and fur. And this is a project, and progress is difficult. Just picture going back 100 generations within your own family. I mean, just picture it kind of mapped onto this room, maybe this front row. Just 100 people. Your father's fathers, mother's fathers, mother's fathers' fathers, on back. Now, I don't care how cultured you are, how well-educated your family. You can be Matthew Chapman, whose great-great-grandfather was Charles Darwin. But if you just keep going, in no more than 100 conversations, you are going to meet someone who thinks that sacrificing your firstborn child just might be a good way to control the weather. Some of you probably don't have to go back quite that far. You just have to go home for Christmas. Okay, if you're going to say that non-locality is an operable principle in neuroscience, that is woo-woo right now in neuroscience.
It's a principle in morphogenesis and differentiation. It's a principle in the workings of the pacemaker of your heart, where 100 pacemaker cells fire simultaneously, non-locally.
Saying it louder and relentlessly is not going to make it true. The great irony of the popular conception of science as arrogant is that when you go to a scientific meeting, you don't see arrogance. I mean, you're about as likely to see real arrogance as you're likely to see nudity at a scientific conference. I mean, this is people are constantly offering caveats and hedges toward what they say. Every statement is couched in, I'm sure there's someone in the room who knows more about this than me, but because everyone is desperate to avoid public embarrassment. Now, this seems to be something you're not doing. Okay, just think about the Muslims at this moment who are blowing themselves up, okay, convinced that they are agents of God's will. There is absolutely nothing that Dr. Craig can say against their behavior in moral terms, apart from his own faith-based claim that they're praying to the wrong God. If they had the right God, what they were doing would be good on divine command theory. Now, I'm obviously not saying that Dr. Craig or all religious people are psychopaths and psychotics, but this, to me, is the true horror of religion. Okay, it allows perfectly decent and sane people to believe by the billions what only lunatics could believe on their own. Okay, if you wake up tomorrow morning thinking that saying a few Latin words over your pancakes is going to turn them into the body of Elvis Presley, okay, you have lost your mind. Okay? But if you think more or less the same thing about a cracker and the body of Jesus, you're just a Catholic.